I never imagined that 20 years of marriage could unravel with just 3 words: I need space. Those words spoken between a plate of chicken parmesan and a slice of tiramisu at Giovanni's pierced deeper than any knife could. My name is Margaret. I am 48 years old, and for 2 decades I built my life around a man who would one day look at me as if I were disposable. The cruel irony was that only 3 weeks before that dinner in a sterile examination room painted mint green, I had learned I had stage 2 breast cancer. The doctor's voice had been gentle, her eyes kind behind her glasses, telling me there was hope with surgery and radiation. At 48, I had barely begun to understand what that word cancer meant for me. I rehearsed in my head how I would break the news to Robert, my husband, the man I had shared a bed and a life with for 2 decades. I planned to do it carefully, rationally, the way he always preferred. But when I got home that night, the house was empty, and a text buzzed on my phone. Working late. Don't wait up. I remember sitting in the kitchen tracing the marble veins of the countertop we had chosen during our 10th anniversary renovation, wondering when our home had stopped being a sanctuary and become a showpiece for his success. When had I become less of a partner and more of an accessory? His late nights, the new cologne. I didn't recognize the sharpness in his tone whenever I tried to talk to him. All of it had been warning signs. But I had been too busy keeping our world together, too busy pretending everything was perfect to admit what was crumbling right in front of me. I should have noticed the receipts from restaurants too intimate for business, the charges from jewelry stores, the lipstick on his collar that wasn't mine. But denial is a strange kind of loyalty. It blinds you until the truth forces itself into your hands. And that night at Giovanni's, the truth was served cold. "I need space, Margaret," he said, not even looking at me. I asked if there was someone else, and his hesitation was the only answer I needed. Jessica, he admitted, his secretary, half my age, as if 20 years of my life could be erased by something that just happened. When he pushed a lawyer's card across the table and told me he wanted a divorce, something inside me shifted. He expected tears, a scene begging. But I gave him nothing. I folded my napkin, left it neatly by my untouched plate, and walked away with my dignity intact, though my heart was in pieces. The envelope from his lawyer arrived within a week. Inside, the cold dismantling of our life together, assets divided, property, itemized, even the pearls he once gave me, reduced to a dollar figure. It was as if love had been nothing more than a contract. My sister Claire told me to fight to take him for everything. But I was exhausted battling cancer in silence, and I knew fighting him then would only drain me further. So I signed. Not out of defeat, but out of strategy. What Robert didn't know was that I had an ally. He had long forgotten his father, George. George had always been more of a parent to me than my own father, especially after my mother died. We met for lunch as we often did, and when I told him about the divorce, his face tightened with disappointment. Not at me, but at his son. And then he told me something that changed everything. Years earlier, after his wife passed away, George had rewritten his will. Robert was set to inherit the family business, the lake house in Vermont, and a considerable fortune. But George had added what he called a moral clause. If Robert ever divorced me without proof of my infidelity, he would lose everything. The entire inheritance would be redirected, leaving him with nothing. Robert had never bothered to read the will, too arrogant, too consumed with his own climb up the ladder. George told me gently, almost apologetically, that he had seen how Robert treated me, how he took me for granted, and he wanted to ensure I would never be discarded without consequence. For the first time since Giovanni's, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't despair. Possibility. Robert thought he had won by leaving me quickly and cleanly, but in truth, he had written his own downfall. In the weeks that followed, while I scheduled surgery and endured radiation treatments, I began quietly rebuilding. I reached out to old friends, leaned on Claire, and even reconnected with Judith, my former mentor, who had broken glass ceilings long before women like me were welcomed in boardrooms. She reminded me that I was not just Robert's wife. I had value, skills, and resilience of my own. Then came the announcement that nearly broke me again. Jessica posted their engagement on Instagram, an image of her manicured hand with a diamond ring standing at Lakeview Cottage, the same place Robert had proposed to me 21 years earlier. The caption read, "Planning our perfect engagement party. #new beginnings." The rage that rose in me was unlike anything I had ever felt. That cottage wasn't just a property, it was a piece of family history, a place filled with memories, a symbol of what Robert and I had once shared. And yet, by George's will, it would never truly be his. I realized then that this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Robert had discarded me without thought, assuming his new life would be secure, that he could rewrite our story without consequence. But the truth had been written long before, sealed in George's will. And now I held the power to reveal it. I began to prepare not for a fight, but for a reckoning. The engagement party was set at Lakeview Cottage 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to heal, to gather my strength to decide how I would deliver the truth. My cancer treatments left me weak, but each session reminded me that I was reclaiming not only my body, but my life. When the day came, I drove to Vermont with the envelope in my bag. Inside it was the notarized copy of the will, the clause that would destroy Robert's illusion. As I approached the cottage, music and laughter spilled into the air. Guests in fine clothes mingled under white lanterns strung across the garden. Robert stood proudly with Jessica by his side, basking in admiration. Jessica saw me first, her smile faltering. She tugged at Robert's arm, and when he turned, his face shifted from annoyance to shock. "Margaret," he said, forcing civility, "this is unexpected." I smiled, my voice calm, almost casual. "Congratulations on your engagement." The crowd hushed, the string quartet faltered, and I reached into my bag, pulling out the envelope. "I won't stay long," I told him. "I just wanted to deliver this in person." His hand shook as he opened it, his face draining of color as he read the words that stripped him of everything he thought he had secured. Jessica grabbed the papers, scanning frantically, her voice sharp and panicked. "This can't be legal." But Robert knew. For once, he was speechless. The crowd whispered, eyes wide. His law partners frowned, already calculating the fallout. Jessica's scream split the air. "You said everything was taken care of." Her dream shattered in front of everyone. I didn't stay to watch the chaos unfold. I turned my slate blue dress, catching the sunlight as I walked back to my car. For months I had carried the weight of betrayal, of cancer, of loss. But in that moment I carried nothing at all. Robert's future had collapsed, and mine was just beginning. The drive back from Lakeview Cottage was a blur of winding roads and autumn leaves swirling across the asphalt. My body trembled, not from weakness alone, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. For weeks I had imagined that moment, the unveiling, the gasps, the silence falling over the crowd. But the reality was messier, rawer, and far more satisfying than I could have planned. I had not screamed. I had not demanded. I had simply delivered the truth, and it had done the work for me. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam curling upward. My chest ached from the radiation earlier that week, my skin sore and tender, but there was a strange steadiness in me now. Robert's voice echoed in my memory, that casual arrogance at Giovanni's when he said, "I need space." He had carved out his space all right, so much space that his entire world had collapsed into it. The fallout came quickly. By Monday morning, the legal community in our town was buzzing. His law partners had been at the engagement party, had witnessed the unveiling, and whispers spread faster than wildfire. George's will was ironclad. Robert's inheritance, his safety net, his future was gone. Every colleague, every client now knew he had built his arrogance on sand. Claire called me that night, her voice sharp with excitement. "Maggie, you should have seen his face. You should have seen Jessica's." She looked like she'd swallowed glass. I chuckled, though my laughter was weary. But beneath the satisfaction there was grief too. Grief for the 20 years I had given him. Grief for the woman I had been, the one who believed love could outlast betrayal, the one who ignored the perfume on his shirt, the missed dinners, the hollow excuses. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone new. Robert tried to call. The first time I ignored it. The second time I let it ring until it stopped. On the third, curiosity got the better of me. His voice was hoarse, desperate. Margaret, please, we need to talk. I almost laughed. Where was this urgency when I was battling cancer alone? Where was this plea when I lay awake at night wondering if my marriage meant anything? There's nothing to talk about, I said finally, my voice steady. The will spoke for itself. He tried again. Jessica didn't know she thought I cut him off. She thought she won. You both did. Then I hung up. The silence afterward was thunderous, but it was the silence I chose. The weeks that followed were strange. On one hand, I felt vindicated. On the other, I felt hollow. Justice doesn't erase scars, it simply ensures they have meaning. The treatments wore me down, my body frail, my hair thinning. Some mornings I struggled just to lift myself from bed. But I kept going. If betrayal hadn't broken me, cancer wouldn't either. One afternoon, Claire came over with soup and a stack of magazines. We sat on the couch flipping through glossy pages filled with women in tailored suits beaming beside headlines about reinvention and second acts. I traced the images with my finger, whispering, "Could that be me?" Claire turned to me, her eyes fierce. "It already is you, you just don't see it yet." Her words lingered. For years I had been Robert's wife. My identity was tethered to his successes, his schedule, his whims. Without him, who was I? The question terrified me, but it also freed me. The answer came slowly through small steps. I returned to painting, something I hadn't done since college. At first, my brush felt awkward in my hand, but soon colors spilled across the canvas, blues and grays of grief, bursts of crimson for anger, streaks of gold for resilience. I hung the first finished piece on my wall and stared at it for hours. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Robert's life unraveled in public view. Jessica left him within a month. Rumor had it she threw her ring into the lake, screaming that he had lied about everything. His colleagues distanced themselves, clients withdrew, and soon he was no longer the golden lawyer with a glittering future, but a cautionary tale whispered about in courtrooms. I should have felt triumphant, and part of me did, but another part pitied him, the boy I once loved, the man who once held my hand at my mother's funeral. Betrayal makes villains of people we once adored, but the memories don't vanish. They just ache in new ways. One evening I received a letter, not from Robert, but from George's attorney. Inside was a note George had left for me, sealed years before. His handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Margaret, if you're reading this, it means the clause has been enacted. I hope it wasn't necessary. But if it was, know this: I saw you always. I saw how you held my son up, how you gave without asking. I'm sorry he couldn't see it. This is my way of ensuring you will never be discarded. You are family to me. Always." Tears blurred the ink. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to sob, not from rage, not from betrayal, but from gratitude. George had been my protector even beyond the grave. In a world where the man I married had failed me, his father had given me dignity back. It was then I realized my story wasn't just about Robert's downfall. It was about the quiet ways people leave us lifelines, about the hidden strengths we discover when everything collapses. Robert had wanted to erase me. George had made sure I could never be erased. I began to rebuild more intentionally. I attended a support group for women with breast cancer, and as I listened to their stories of fear, of resilience, of husbands who stayed, and husbands who left, I found community. We laughed, we cried, we held each other up. For the first time since Robert's betrayal, I didn't feel alone. One woman, Lydia, leaned over after a session and said, "You tell your story so well. Have you ever thought about writing it down?" The idea frightened me. To put my pain into words felt like giving it permanence. But maybe that was the point. Maybe my story could be more than just mine. It could be a lantern for someone else lost in the dark. Meanwhile, Robert's attempts to reach me dwindled. The last time I saw him, he was walking out of a courthouse, his once polished suit rumpled, his shoulders hunched. He didn't see me, and I didn't call out. There was nothing left to say. At home, I lit a candle by the window and opened my journal. For hours, I wrote not about him, but about me. About the girl I had been, the woman I had become, the future I still dared to imagine. And in those pages, I felt myself return piece by fragile piece. Justice had been served at Lakeview Cottage. But healing that was happening here, in the quiet, one brush stroke, one word, one breath at a time. The autumn leaves gave way to winter's chill, and with it came a silence I hadn't felt in years. Not the suffocating silence of a loveless marriage, but a gentler one, the kind that allows you to hear your own voice again. For the first time since Robert uttered those words, "I need space," I no longer felt erased. Radiation treatments left me drained, but they also stripped away illusions I once clung to. Sitting in waiting rooms with other women, I realized betrayal came in many forms. Some spoke of husbands who left like Robert. Others spoke of families who never visited, of children too busy to call. Yet in their laughter and their resilience, I found something I had lost: faith in connection. Claire remained by my side, steadfast as always. She drove me to treatments, filled my freezer with soups, and sometimes simply held my hand when the fatigue made me cry. "You carried Robert for 20 years, she whispered once. "Now let us carry you." Her words pierced me not with pain, but with relief. I had been carrying so much for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to rest. I painted more. Canvas after canvas leaned against my living room wall, each one bolder than the last. Deep reds bled into cool blues, jagged strokes softened by swirls of gold. My therapist told me I was processing my trauma in color, that my art was saying what my words could not. I wasn't sure if it was art or chaos, but each stroke felt like reclamation. One snowy afternoon, I received an invitation to a gallery exhibit downtown. It was for survivors of illness and loss, a showcase of art created in the shadow of grief. Claire insisted I submit a few pieces. I hesitated, terrified of being seen not as Robert's wife, not as the betrayed woman, but as myself. Yet something inside urged me to try. The night of the exhibit, I stood in a small but vibrant gallery, watching strangers pause before my canvases. One woman whispered to another, "It feels like breaking and healing at the same time." I blinked back tears. That was me, broken, healing, and still standing. It was there that I met Eleanor, the gallery owner. A sharp-eyed woman with silver hair who carried herself like she had weathered 1,000 storms. "Your work has weight," she told me. "Not everyone can turn pain into something that speaks." She offered to display more of my pieces, even suggested a solo show one day. For the first time in years, possibility didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt like a door opening. Meanwhile, news of Robert's downfall continued to ripple through our community. His law firm dissolved their partnership with him. His name no longer graced the firm's letterhead. Jessica disappeared entirely. Her social media accounts wiped clean, as if erasing him erased her own shame. He was left adrift, stripped of the empire he thought untouchable. I learned all this not from him but from Whisper's articles, the quiet satisfaction in Claire's voice when she updated me. I didn't seek it out. I no longer needed to. His story was his to carry now. Mine was finally mine. Yet healing is not a straight line. One evening I woke from a nightmare, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. In the dream, Robert stood in our old kitchen holding out divorce papers while I crumbled to the floor. The nightmare replayed that first betrayal again and again. It took me hours to calm down, to remind myself that I was no longer that woman on the floor. I was the woman who walked away with an envelope that changed everything. To steady myself, I returned to George's letter. I read his words over and over, his assurance that I was family, his recognition of what I had endured. In his absence, he had given me a gift greater than any inheritance: validation. He had seen me even when Robert had not. By spring, my hair began to grow back soft and uneven. I stood in front of the mirror one morning, touching the new strands, and smiled. They weren't the same as before, but neither was I. Each new strand was a symbol of survival. It was around this time that Eleanor invited me to speak at the gallery, not just to show my art, but to share my story. My first instinct was to refuse. I had spent years hiding my pain, wearing masks of composure. But when she said, "Your voice might be what someone else needs," I couldn't ignore it. The night of the talk, I stood trembling before a small crowd. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. But as I looked at the faces, curious, compassionate, waiting, I found my voice. "I was married for 20 years, I began softly. I thought I had built a life, a future. Instead, I had built a stage for betrayal. My husband rehearsed my erasure while I painted myself invisible. But when the truth came, I realized silence could be power. And in losing everything, I found myself again. The room was still. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. And when the applause came, it was not polite, but genuine, like a wave of affirmation washing over me. Afterward, a young woman approached, her hands shaking. "My husband left me during chemo," she whispered. "I thought I was worthless, but hearing you, I don't feel so alone anymore." I hugged her tightly, tears stinging my eyes. That night, I understood my story was not just mine. It was a mirror for others, a lantern in someone else's darkness. And yet, even as I rose, Robert's shadow lingered. I heard he had moved into a small apartment downtown, selling his car, living far below the life he once flaunted. Some pitied him, others mocked him. I felt neither. I felt only distance, as if he belonged to another life I had shed. But fate wasn't finished. One rainy afternoon, as I left the gallery, I saw him. He stood across the street, older somehow, shoulders hunched, suit rumpled. His eyes met mine, and for a moment the years collapsed. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. I waited, calm, steady. He lowered his gaze, turned, and walked away. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. The woman who once would have begged for answers was gone. In her place stood someone who no longer needed his recognition. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes it is the silence of no longer needing one." The cancer was not gone, the scars not erased, the pain not forgotten. But I was alive. I was painting. I was speaking. I was becoming. And for the first time in 20 years, I belonged to myself. The summer sun felt different that year, warmer, brighter, less like something to endure, and more like something to soak into my skin. My body was still fragile, scarred from the fight with cancer, but there was a lightness inside me I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't happiness exactly, not yet, but it was freedom. In the mornings, I walked through the park near my apartment, watching children chase kites while parents called after them. Once scenes like that made me ache with longing for the family Robert and I never had. Now I simply breathed it in, grateful to witness joy, even if it wasn't mine to hold. Healing, I learned, wasn't about erasing absence, it was about making peace with it. Claire often joined me, her arm hooked through mine as we strolled. She was relentless in her encouragement, pushing me to try new things. "Come with me to a cooking class," she insisted one afternoon. I laughed, reminding her I once burned rice. "That's the point," she teased. "Start fresh. Burn something new." So I did. I began taking small risks again, cooking, traveling short distances, even daring to laugh without guilt. My world no longer revolved around Robert or around loss. It revolved around discovery. Yet even as I embraced this new rhythm, echoes of the past haunted me. At night I still dreamed of Giovanni's, of Robert sliding that lawyer's card across the table. Sometimes in those dreams I would scream at him, demand to know why. Other nights I would crumble, begging. But when I woke, I reminded myself that was the script he wrote for me. In reality, I had chosen silence, and in silence I had found power. One evening, Eleanor, the gallery owner, called with unexpected news. "Margaret, we want to feature you in a solo exhibition this fall. Your work resonates. People see themselves in it." I nearly dropped the phone. Me, a solo exhibition. I thought of the woman who once hid in her kitchen clutching divorce papers, too broken to imagine a future. And now my pain would hang on walls for strangers to witness, to interpret, to carry with them. The months leading up to the exhibition were grueling. I painted until my fingers ached, until my back screamed, until the canvases filled every inch of my apartment. Each piece was a chapter of my journey, shadows tangled with light, jagged lines, smoothed by curves, emptiness punctuated by bursts of color. I named one, Inheritance of Silence, another Clause of Truth. The centerpiece I titled Lakeview Reckoning. Opening night was surreal. The gallery buzzed with voices, glasses clinking, footsteps echoing across polished floors. People stood before my canvases, murmuring words like raw, powerful, unflinching. I stood in the corner at first, overwhelmed, until Claire nudged me forward. "Own it, Maggie. This is yours." So I did. I walked among the guests, answering questions, telling fragments of my story. And for the first time, I felt not like a victim but like a storyteller, not erased but indelible. Of course, shadows lingered. Robert hadn't vanished entirely. I heard his name whispered, still usually attached to phrases like downfall or embarrassment. One night after the exhibition closed, I returned home to find an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, but the handwriting was his. Inside was a single-page "Margaret. I am sorry. I thought I was building a future, but I destroyed it instead. I see that now. You were my anchor, my partner, my family, and I threw it all away. Please forgive me." I sat with that letter for a long time. Once it would have broken me. Once it would have pulled me back, made me question everything. But now I felt only sadness. Sadness that he realized too late. Sadness that his apology came not in the moments I needed it, but after he had lost everything. Forgiveness, I realized, is not about absolving the other person. It's about freeing yourself. So I lit a match, held the letter over the flame, and watched it curl into ash. The smoke rose into the night, carrying away the last of his hold on me. The emotional climax came not in that moment, but weeks later, when I was invited to speak at a women's conference. The theme was resilience. Standing on the stage before hundreds of women, I felt my heart pound, my palms sweat. But when I began to speak, the words flowed. I was married for 20 years to a man who believed he could erase me. He rehearsed my collapse, planned my silence, and thought I would beg. But when the time came, I chose differently. I chose silence not as surrender, but as strength. I chose to hand him the truth instead of my tears. And in losing him, I found myself. The applause thundered. Tears streamed down faces in the audience. Women came to me afterward, sharing their own stories of betrayal, abandonment, and survival. One whispered, "You said what I've been too afraid to admit." Another pressed my hands and said, "You gave me hope." It was then I understood my story had power, not because of Robert, not because of George's will, but because I chose to tell it. I chose to rise from erasure into voice. That night, I stood on my balcony, city lights glittering like constellations. The scars on my body ached, but they were reminders of survival, not shame. My phone buzzed with messages from women who had heard me speak, each one a ripple of connection. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Robert may have demanded space. He may have demanded divorce. But in the end, it was I who claimed the space I needed, the space to breathe, to heal, to create, to live. The climax of my story was not his downfall. It was my return to myself. Autumn returned once more, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the crunch of leaves underfoot. A year had passed since the night at Lakeview Cottage, since Robert's downfall, since I delivered the envelope that unraveled his carefully rehearsed future. A year since I had been forced to face betrayal, illness, and the quiet collapse of the life I once thought unshakable. And yet here I stood, still breathing, still creating, still becoming. My exhibition had closed to glowing reviews. Eleanor told me I had sold more paintings than most first-time artists could hope for. But it wasn't the sales that stayed with me, it was the people. The woman who bought Inheritance of Silence told me it would hang in her daughter's room, a reminder that even brokenness can be beautiful. A man whose wife had died of cancer stood before Lakeview Reckoning for nearly an hour, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. My art had ceased being just mine. It had become a mirror for others. I began teaching small workshops at the gallery, encouraging women to paint their stories. At first they hesitated, claiming they weren't artists. I smiled each time and said neither was I. Pain doesn't ask if you're ready to create, it just spills out. Watching their tentative strokes turn into bold colors, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt legacy. Meanwhile, my health stabilized. The treatments had worked, though the doctors warned me to remain vigilant. Every scar, every checkup was a reminder that survival is never passive. It is a choice you make each day. And each day I chose to live not as a shadow of who I once was, but as the author of who I was becoming. Robert faded from my life as all ghosts eventually do. Sometimes I caught whispers he had moved out of state, taken small legal cases, lived in obscurity. His arrogance had withered, his empire gone. Once I thought closure meant seeing him ruined. But now I understood closure was never about him, it was about me. And I had closed the chapter long before he even realized the book was over. One crisp October morning, I visited George's grave. I hadn't been there since his funeral, too consumed then by my own unraveling. I knelt before the stone, brushing leaves from its base, and whispered, "Thank you." Not just for the will, not just for the clause that saved me from erasure, but for seeing me when his son never did. For reminding me that worth is not determined by the blind, but by those who truly recognize us. As I drove home, I thought of the journey that had brought me here. Betrayal had once felt like an ending. Cancer had once felt like a death sentence. But both had become turning points, painful and brutal, yet transformative. Life, I realized, is not about avoiding heartbreak. It is about surviving it, learning from it, and carrying its lessons forward. When the conference invited me back to speak again, I accepted without hesitation. This time, the crowd was larger, the stage brighter. I stood before them, my heart steady, and spoke not with trembling but with conviction. I was married for 20 years to a man who believed he could discard me. He rehearsed my collapse, planned my silence, and thought he had written my ending. But the truth is, this no one can write your story but you. Yes, betrayal will break you. Yes, illness will scar you. But those cracks are not the end, they are the places where light gets in. And when the light finds you, you rise. The applause swelled, but I no longer measured my worth by claps or validation. I measured it by the quiet strength I felt when I walked off that stage, shoulders squared, heart whole. That evening, back on my balcony, I lit a single candle. The flame flickered against the dark, small but unyielding. I thought of all the women out there still sitting in kitchens, clutching papers, still listening to cruel words behind doors, still believing they are invisible. I wanted to reach them, to whisper, "You are not erased. You are not alone, and you are stronger than you think." Life will always test us. It will hand us betrayals, illnesses, losses we cannot prepare for. But in those trials lies the chance to discover who we are when everything else is stripped away. I had been a wife, a caretaker, a ghost in my own marriage. Now I was simply Margaret. And that was enough. So if you are listening to my story tonight, I want you to remember this. Silence can be power, scars can be strength, and endings can be beginnings. Don't let anyone else write your story. Hold the pen. Write it yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. And most of all, share your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Because together, our voices become louder than betrayal, stronger than silence, and brighter than any darkness.